Well, hello. I'm Dr. Mary Mulway, and this is the first of a several-part series on structured literacy. So over the next few videos, we're going to talk about what the components of structured literacy are, how it differs from a balanced literacy or whole language approach, why it's so important for students to learn in this way, and how it's actually implemented both in a classroom and in an intervention setting. So a little bit about me before we get started. I've served for 25 years in public education and in private as a reading specialist, curriculum specialist, and administrator. I currently serve as an administrator at a school that specializes in dyslexia, and literacy is my great passion in life. My doctorate is in educational leadership, and I also serve as an adjunct professor in the teacher education programs at two different universities. So let's get right into this, into structured literacy. What is it and why is it so important? So structured literacy is, as the name implies, a structured approach to teaching the necessary skills to become a proficient reader. Structured literacy is explicit, systematic, and sequential. There is nothing that is left to chance in a structured literacy approach. Everything is explicitly and systematically taught. There is no assumption that students will pick it up later as they go. It is always taught to mastery. Now, the explicit, systematic, and sequential applies if you're teaching it to a whole group, like in the classroom. But then, if you're working in an intervention group or in a tutoring situation, we add on two more components, and that is diagnostic and prescriptive. So you want to start where kids need it, and you go back to the lowest common denominator. So what was the very first fundamental skill that students could or could not do? So structured literacy also includes cumulative practice and ongoing review, significant amounts of teacher-student interaction, carefully chosen examples and non-examples, decodable text, and we're going to talk a lot more about decodable text in another video, but by decodable in a structured literacy setting, I actually mean that every word on the page that students are being asked to read has been explicitly taught. There are no words on there that a student has not been directly taught. There is specific and immediate feedback, and then also teaching to master, which is a key component of a structured literacy approach. So as I said, nothing is left to chance in a structured literacy approach. Teaching is intentional. From the cards that are put into the deck for review, the words that are chosen as examples, the decodable text, the words that are dictated, the sentences that are dictated, all of that is intentional and focused on the target skill. Now, structured literacy approach heralds back to the simple view of reading, which was created, that term, in 1990. And in the simple view of reading, decoding times language comprehension equals your reading comprehension. So if students are struggling with decoding, it doesn't matter how great their language comprehension is. If either of those two parts of the equation are low, it's going to affect the end, which is reading comprehension, right? From a mathematical standpoint, 0 times 1 is 0, right? So we have to make sure that students' language comprehension is strong and that their decoding is strong in order to have strong reading comprehension. The language comprehension piece is often really overlooked, not by speech and language pathologists, that's why we have them in our schools, but that its relationship to reading is so important. Both the expressive and receptive language of students and their understanding of spoken language is obviously a key component into their reading comprehension because the order in which we acquire language comes listening, speaking, reading, and then writing. And if kids don't understand syntax, semantics, phonological processing, orally and orally, which we'll get to in just a second, they will not have the skills to decode and then to comprehend. So what are the components of structured literacy? Here's the list of them: phonemic awareness, phonics, syllable types, morphology, syntax, semantics and vocabulary, text structure, and comprehension. And we're going to go through each of those one at a time and talk about them a little bit, but then in subsequent videos we'll spend more time on them. So phonemic awareness is the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate the sounds or phonemes of the language. Phonemic awareness is all oral, meaning heard, and oral. There are no letters involved. And oftentimes in the classes that I teach, I've actually seen a textbook that confused phonemic awareness and phonics, and teachers actually often confuse those two things. They are two completely separate things. Phonemic awareness is the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate the sounds of the language, and it is the foundation for all reading skills. So let me give you an example of a phonemic awareness activity. I might say to a student, say the word bat, bat. Give me the sounds in bat, b, a, t. Okay? That was a segmentation activity. Now I might say to a student, I want you to take the sounds I give you and blend them into a word, okay? So I'm going to give you b, a, t. And the kids say b, a, t, bat. Okay, that's a blending activity. And the manipulation would be to change something. So if I give a student the word sit, it, now change the middle sound in sit to a, what word do you have? And they say sat. That is a phoneme manipulation activity. Again, all oral and oral. Once we have foundational skills in phonemic awareness, we can move into phonics, which is probably the best known and still strangely debated aspect of reading. So let me be clear about phonics. Phonics-based instruction is the only way in which students will become proficient readers. There is no argument anymore. Decades of research about reading clearly indicate the data supports that phonics-based instruction, explicit and systematic phonics-based instruction, is what creates proficient readers. But again, it has to be based on that phonemic awareness because of the language comprehension. So phonics is based on the alphabetic principle, which says that words are made up of letters that correspond with sounds, that the letter B makes the B sound, right? So students are using phonemes and connecting them with letters, which now are graphemes, the letter that represents a sound, in order to decode words. Next in structured literacy are syllable types, and in English there are 6 types. A syllable is a single, unbroken sound of a written or spoken word, right? So for example, in the word cloudy, there are 2 syllables, cloud and E, cloudy. The types of syllable types are closed, open, silent E, are controlled, vowel teams, and consonant LE. One more thought before I move off this slide, and that is, why do we teach syllable types? Because students need to know where to break words up in order to decode them. That is the simple explanation for that. So moving on, we're going to talk about morphology, which I happen to be writing a morphology curriculum right now, so I'm very invested in this right now. So morphology is the study of morphemes, and a morpheme is the smallest unit of language that has meaning. Now you're probably most familiar with this because of Latin and Greek, which you probably learned as a student. And there are two kinds, free morphemes that can stand on their own and bound morphemes, which have to be attached to a free morpheme. Now, it depends on whose research you read or what linguistics book you pick up, but the words base words, roots, combining forms, and stems are used pretty interchangeably. In this presentation, I'm going to use base words separate from roots and combining forms, but in the curriculum I'm writing, I actually use the word base word to refer to all of those things to cut down on the confusion for students, but they are used pretty interchangeably. So let's take a look at an example here. So a base word, according to linguistics, are free morphemes that stand alone, like house, chair, and garden. Now these are all nouns, but it could be happy, which is an adjective, and that is a base word that stands on its own. No prefixes, no suffixes, just the word itself. Now there are Latin roots that are morphemes that cannot stand on their own. No Latin root can stand alone. It has meaning, it's a morpheme, but they are always attached to prefixes or suffixes to create words. So for example, the root ject. Ject means to throw, but it has to have something with it for it to stand as a word, like object or object, objection, reject, projector. All of those are morphemes, prefixes, suffixes, or affixes together, and root words are all morphemes, but these are all bound morphemes. They can't stand on their own. And then Greek combining forms, they're similar to Latin roots, but they operate slightly differently. Generally, you have two combining forms together. So in this example, bio means life, logia means the study of, so biology is the study of life. So why study morphology? Well, one, the division between prefixes, roots, and suffixes, or the two combining forms, helps students with decoding because they understand where to break the word up in order to pronounce it correctly. Secondly, and almost more importantly, is that 75% of the words in English that have more than one syllable have a Latin root or Greek combining form. So when students are able to understand the meaning of the most common roots and affixes, it increases their vocabulary and their understanding of semantics exponentially. And specifically in social studies and science, right? Latin roots in social studies and Greek combining forms in science, we are really increasing their subject area vocabulary when we engage in a study of morphology. Next, in structured literacy, is syntax. And syntax has to do with the order of words in a sentence, phrase, or clause. So, for example, the brown dog jumped over the fence. In this sentence, dog is the subject, jumped is the verb, there's your subject, your simple subject and simple predicate. And then brown, the adjective comes before the noun in English, is your adjective, and over the fence is a prepositional phrase, which modifies verb because it tells us where he jumped. Syntax is super important for students, and I found specifically for second language students that syntax was problematic because the order of words is different in different languages, and so it has to be explicitly taught to students for them to understand the meaning and to be able to read and write sentences proficiently. And now on to semantics. As I mentioned before, studying morphology increases students' semantical knowledge. And semantics is the meaning of a word, phrase, or sentence. And it includes denotation, that's what a word actually means, and connotation, it's the flavor of the word, which I'll show you an example in just a second, multiple meanings and shades of meaning. So here's our example. The dog was thin, the dog was emaciated. Now, thin and emaciated are synonyms in the thesaurus, but thin has a connotation of being healthy or maybe even slightly underweight, but emaciated has the connotation of starvation. So even the denotation is similar because they're synonyms, the connotation is very different. I have found in my experience that second language students really struggle with these, and also that students on the autism spectrum tend to have a difficult time with shades of meaning and multiple meanings because they tend to be very black and white thinkers. Not always, I'm not overgeneralizing, but I ran an autism center in California, and that was a key aspect that kept coming up is that, one word should have one meaning, and that's just not the way English works because it's a conglomeration of so many languages. And then another aspect of structured literacy is text structure. It cannot be understated the importance of explicitly and systematically teaching students the structure of text. And expository text in particular can have many structures, including main idea and supporting detail, or claim and evidence, comparison and contrast, cause and effect, or chronological. And students need to be able to identify the text structure because it increases their comprehension. And text structure also includes things like headings and subheadings, having graphs or charts or pictures or captions, and what all of those pieces of the text mean for a student when they're trying to read a textbook. And then finally, we get to comprehension. Now, strangely, you can't actually teach comprehension. Comprehension is the end result, but you can teach all of the skills that are necessary to develop comprehension: prediction, clarifying, connecting, visualizing, summarizing, drawing inferences, and drawing conclusions. Those are all skills necessary for teaching comprehension. But do you remember the simple view of reading, what the two things were that led to better comprehension? Decoding and language comprehension. So those two pieces have to be in place. And then we look at the skills involved in comprehension. And here are the references for this presentation if you would like to look any of those up. So I would just like to thank you for joining me today in my presentation and invite you to come visit us. Our website is www.brainworks.net. You're welcome to email me if you have any questions, and we are also on social media. I would love it if you would take a look at my TED Talk. You can find it on my website at brainworks.org, and also you can find it on YouTube. Thank you so much.